Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to a new episode of Polemic Nation. I'm super excited about today's topic. It is something that I want to talk more about, and I think we should have more conversations about this. We always say here in Polemic Nation that knowledge is power, and we want to empower all of you with the best and newest information possible. So today we have a very special guest. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. His name is Jordan Foster. His research focuses on the intersection of culture, consumption, media, and inequality. How are you today, Jordan?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're doing a lot of work, a lot of research, constantly updating so much. And today we're going to talk about all of these areas that you're focusing on, but related to fashion, which I think is super, super important because we are wearing clothes, consuming clothes, and in many ways, clothes are a reflection of who we are and what we stand for. And I think that in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of movement in terms of inclusion in fashion. So can you talk a little bit about some of the factors that have encouraged this movement towards inclusion?
Yeah, of course. So it's definitely correct to say that in the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of changes with respect to diversity, representation, and inclusion in fashion, both in terms of sort of mass fashion or what we might call commercial fashion. So those are big box retailers, but also in the couture space. So some of these changes include a look toward more models of color. Others include a look toward models who are fuller in shape and size, as well as models who are a little bit older. So these are models who for a long time have been excluded from mainstream representations in fashion and from runway shows, product advertisements, etc. Now, more recently, we've seen this shift, and that really comes down to two leading explanations. The one is what we might call a sort of supply side explanation. This is where people within the industry take it upon themselves to push for diversity. We would call this a kind of entrepreneurialism. So industry leaders may look out at the scene and say we need a little bit more diversity, and so select models who are more diverse along a number of different axes and then cast them in, say, mainstream shows or for advertisements and commercial images. Another leading explanation would be what we would call a demand side explanation. This is where consumers are ultimately pushing for more kinds of representation, diversity, and inclusion. And when this is the case, industry leaders do tend to listen. It depends on how sustained that consumer demand is for diversity. But in the last 5 years, we've definitely seen a sustained a push from consumers who are really hungry for models and images that represent who they are, that look a little bit more like them. And so together, between this consumer push and between industry entrepreneurialism, we are increasingly seeing more diversity in the fashion space.
That last part that you just mentioned is super, super important because many people have the assumption that designers just do whatever they want to do and then consumers are following, kind of like a dictatorship in fashion where like there's the fashion industry dictating what people wear, but it's very democratic, right? The consumers have a lot of power in the way fashion evolves and how quickly it is evolving. And I love that you say that people are hungry to be represented in fashion, because I've had multiple debates around this topic with my friends and people who are not so my friends. And one of the arguments that I hear a lot is that the fashion industry used to have like this very specific standard of beauty because they were selling this ideal, like this person that people wanted to be like. But in the process of trying to become this person, eating disorders happen, lots of low self-esteem, mental disorders happen, and we started to realize that this is not a healthy lifestyle and this is not a way in which consumers want to consume fashion anymore, right?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think fashion for some time was very much wedded to this, we would call it the sort of thin ideal. And that thin ideal had serious implications for young people Well, for people of all ages, really, but I think including and especially young people who looked to these representations of beauty and ultimately, thought that in order to feel beautiful or look beautiful, they had to follow suit. And of course, that ideal is very difficult to achieve. And to achieve it, we tend to have to go to some very unhealthy lengths, right? Now, I would say that today's beauty ideal has shifted. And the fashion industry, on the one hand, is certainly more inclusive than it has been in the past. In terms of that shift in the beauty ideal, though, I would argue that it's not necessarily more attainable. I think today's beauty ideal is really about being thin in the right places and full in the right places. That's arguably as tricky to manage, right, without some sort of intervention. But certainly fashion is becoming more diverse and inclusive. So there's a wider range of body types that are up for view. I think, as I said, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that the beauty ideal is significantly altered or that there aren't still pressures for people to look a certain way.
Absolutely. One of the areas of fashion inclusion that you mentioned a lot in your work that I think it's super, super important because we don't talk a lot about it is disability, the visibility of people with disabilities. There's a lot of conversations around race, about gender, about sizes, and all of these are super important, but also disability, because around 20% of people in the United States have a disability. And you also mentioned in your work that in over 5 years, three mainstream fashion magazines, I'm not going to say their names, but it's Vogue, InStyle, and Harper's Bazaar, have not had a single person with a disability in their cover. So this is an area of opportunity in the fashion industry as well, right? So can you explain a little bit more of the insights of your research around this topic?
Yeah, so um, my co-author and I came to take a closer look at fashion and diversity, but we were really interested in seeing what kinds of representation existed for people with a disability in the sort of fashion space. And what we found is that by and large, people with a disability are excluded from mainstream representations of fashion. So that's not only on, say, the cover of magazines, but it's also in terms of their editorial spreads, their advertisements enclosed in magazines, and then also in terms of runway shows and other mainstream productions. This has shifted a little bit more in, say, the last 4 years, where we're starting to see models with a disability cast for these editorials, advertisements, and runway shows. That includes models like Kate Grant. It includes models like Erin Phillips. So we're beginning to see disability in these representations, but disability makes for a really interesting case because, as you sort of point out, it's the last axes of diversity that the fashion industry is now tending to. So in the, say, last decade, they've certainly been more conscientious about how they can represent race, about how they can represent body size and body diversity along a number of different dimensions. But disability has been the sort of last frontier for inclusion. And that is shifting. We're seeing that shift happen quite quickly in what we would call, again, the commercial space. And in part, this is because the commercial space is very sensitive to consumer demand, more so than, say, elite or couture fashion. So the commercial space here, you can think of retailers like Zara, H&M, Victoria's Secret, American Eagle. These are retailers who really depend on their consumers to shop and make purchases, and who are ultimately beholden to consumer desire. Now, people with a disability actually make up a significant number of consumers within this landscape and have been by and large neglected. So there are real sort of dollars and cents here, which I think commercial retailers are increasingly interested in capturing. So there is a desire to capture these consumers, to not only cast them in images and advertisements, but also to manufacture clothing for people with a disability, which is unique. So Tommy Hilfiger, for example, has made a line of adaptive garments, and these are tailored specifically for people with a disability, which is really cool, and I think something we need more of. The couture space, or elite fashion, is somewhat less sensitive to consumer demand. This is fashion that is manufactured for a very small number of consumers around the globe, for a number of consumers who have a substantial amount of economic capital or wealth. And so given that this is a market that is less sensitive to the sort of mass of consumers, we're not seeing quite as much change here. There's certainly more opportunity for inclusion for people with a disability, but the couture space continues to be dominated by other kinds of representation. So here again, we're seeing things like age representation, gender diversity, body size diversity, but less so with respect to disability.
Something super important is that I don't like, it's not as easy as hiring models with disabilities and like bam, there's the visibility. There's a lot of time and work and money that fashion companies are investing in these changes to happen. As you mentioned, the Tommy Hilfiger collection, they had to design the garments so that people with disabilities can put them on, because many people cannot put on zippers or buttons or like stand up and put a dress. So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of time, there's a lot of money invested in this. And so this makes me wonder, why do fashion companies want to do this? And to your point that you just mentioned, I think that it's also like the money, but it's also the cancel culture, right? The fact that people like fashion companies don't want to get canceled. Fashion companies are scared of the how loud our voices are as consumers right now, with Instagram, with TikTok reviewing products and saying this is no longer okay, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'll pick up on a little bit of what you've said. So there is sort of two things at work. One is that there seems to be quite a significant difference in the demographic of consumers with purchasing power today and their specific interests. Increasingly, these consumers, so this will be millennials and Gen Z, not only have access to a considerable amount of financial capital and are willing to spend on fashion garments, but they also have a vested interest in authenticity, in ordinariness. They're increasingly interested in diversity and inclusion. So this is a body of consumers who is, very keen to see themselves represented in fashion. Parallel to this, we see the rise of social media, and social media affords consumers these touch points, right, to access brands, to let their voices be heard, to comment on brand images and the like. And together, I think these things are really meaning, as you said, that brands can't ignore or can no longer ignore the voices of consumers, not in the way that they might have in the past. And we do see this on social media. So we see young people, for example, posting TikTok videos, commenting on what they would like to see from fashion brands. We see realistic clothing hauls on TikTok, which I think are a fabulous sort of critique of fashion advertising. And they're very sensitive to things like body size, which is wonderful, right? Because this is something that ultimately gets back to brands, and then brands rethink the product. They might be willing to remanufacture it in more size inclusive ways. They may be able to collaborate with young people who are critiquing the brands in order to sort of change up their messaging or listen more closely. And I think this is very important. And we see it elsewhere too. We see it in places like Instagram, and we see it in spaces like YouTube. There's certainly more work to be done across these social media spaces. They're not as democratic and inclusive as we might like to think that they are. But certainly there are, huge opportunities here. And these social media platforms have been used to great effect to date.
So social media personalities are in many ways one voice that represents many voices of what people want to hear and people want to see. Um, so do you think that this is in many ways like accelerating this process of inclusion? I know that it's not like 100% answer because there are social media personalities who are going in the opposite direction, but has that been a factor in the research that you've been doing?
Yeah, so I think without a doubt, social media personas and personalities play a role in accelerating this push forward to include more diverse kinds of models, and to be more sensitive to diversity in general with respect to fashion manufacturing. I think that sort of goes without saying. They certainly play a huge role in the kinds of diversity and representation that we are seeing. Um, the There is a little bit of an issue that remains, though, with respect to these platforms, and that's that alongside these diverse voices who are doing wonderful work, right, and drawing attention to the needs of consumers, um, we have existing stars who embody what we would call social privileges, right? So these are the stars who are sort of white, cisgendered, their body is conventionally attractive and sort of normatively appealing. And these platforms, whether it be TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, still tend to be dominated by this cast of personas. And that's a little bit of a problem, right? So we see the entrance of new stars who are a little bit more diverse, and they're doing a great job of shedding light on diversity, speaking on behalf of consumers, and really capturing attention. But they exist alongside a cast of very privileged stars who still command significant power in the industry. This is something that I think we should sort of keep our eye on. It's something that's still shifting, but we do need to recognize that alongside these, wonderful and more inclusive pushes, there are existing hierarchies that are still at play here. There are still, existing social privileges and statuses that very much shape opportunities online and elsewhere.
That's a very interesting point, because the people who give like this much power and this platform is you and I and the listeners, right? We are the ones who follow these social media personalities. So it's not just the fashion companies that need to make this room towards inclusion. Is you and I and all of the consumers, when we tend to follow people that fall into this category, and we tend to ignore or not support that much, because there are social media personalities of different backgrounds, transgender people, plus size people, people from different backgrounds, people with disabilities. And I think that's fascinating about social media, how everyone can be seen and share their thoughts and their values in social media. But what I get from what you're saying is that this is teamwork, and that we could also give voice and influence to these personalities, right?
Yeah, no, there's to the everyday social media user, I think we might say, be sensitive to who it is that you're choosing to follow and who it is that you choose to support, and just be critical about that. It doesn't mean you have to unfollow everyone who you've loved for a very long time, but it might just mean keeping an eye out for new kinds of talent, or for people who have historically been underrepresented on these platforms, because your following and your engagement with these personas matters very much for their later influence, right? And I'll just add here that, again, speaking to some of the existing problems with these platforms, we know, for example, from leaked correspondence at TikTok, that the original algorithm suppressed the voices of queer creators and people who were considered ugly or unattractive, right? So there's a clear flaw here in how this application works. And with respect to Instagram, we know that pay tends to be quite uneven across creators, including and especially for creators of color, who are underpaid relative to their white counterparts. So that's what I mean by, alongside these really wonderful pushes for diversity and inclusion, we continue to experience or see obstacles and issues that we need to be sensitive to.
As an average fashion consumer who is not working in the fashion industry or in mass media, what can this person do in order to encourage this path towards inclusive fashion?
Okay, so for the average consumer, there's a couple things to think about. One is, of course, to let your voice be heard through the means that you have available to you. So that might mean going to a brand page, and if you don't like something that you see, it's okay to comment on that in a way that's respectful, and that ultimately sort of outlines what it is your grievance might be with a particular brand. So let's say you're seeing an athletic brand that's only casting models of a very specific size or type. You might say, I love your product and I would love to purchase more from you, but this really doesn't feel right to me, or I would love to see myself represented here. These are things that brands are looking out for, right? So feel free, I would say, to the average consumer to use your voice across platforms, as this tends to be the entryway that a lot of people feel comfortable with. Alternatively, it's okay to simply stop supporting brands, right? And we see this a lot. Both what we would call boycotts and boycotts are sort of on the rise, especially among Gen Z and millennials. This is a kind of political engagement, consumer political engagement. The young people are particularly interested in, and that we know from the data on this subject, they're quite engaged with. And that's a really powerful way to effect change, is simply to withhold from purchasing from brands that you're not comfortable with. Say, and that could be for reasons related to diversity, or it could be reasons to do with, say, the environment. We know a lot of consumers are, not interested in purchasing from brands like Zara or H&M because of the perils of fast fashion. And so we're increasingly seeing that. So I think between these two avenues, both sort of being sensitive to where you're purchasing from, but also letting your voice be heard, say on social media, the everyday consumer can actually make a difference.
One of the things that I love writing in political fashion is how fashion has the power to make us feel better or worse about ourselves. And we tend to shame our body instead of questioning what are fashion companies doing with their clothes. When people try on their clothes and then it is too tight or too small, we tend to think there's something wrong with my body. There's something wrong with how thin, how wide, how narrow I am. But we don't stop and think, hey, maybe these fashion companies are designing for just one body size that is like the standard ideal of beauty that they are still following, and they are not designing for me. And this comes to your point to supporting fashion companies that make you feel good with your body, that fit you, that yeah, that don't make you feel like there's something wrong with your body, and that you look good with them. So this can be raising your voice in social media, or simply also supporting the fashion companies that make you feel good about it, about you yourself, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think fashion is, as you said, really a means to sort of feel empowered, or it can be. And I think there's no one who's listening who hasn't had a moment where they feel more confident or special because they put something on that they really love or they feel comfortable in. And conversely, you may put something on that you don't feel very special in. But instead of getting down on yourself, you could, as you said, turn your focus toward the brand and question instead, why was this made the way that it was? Why doesn't it suit all body types or my body type? I heard this a long time ago and I absolutely love it. When you try on clothing, you should think about the clothing as auditioning for a role in your life. You are not auditioning for the clothing. And I love that. And I'm just going to plug, again, TikTok's realistic clothing haul. So Remy Bader is an influencer who's done a lot of great work in this space. And I think that it's such a fun way to engage with fashion and to think about the ways that fashion garments can look and make us feel. And I'd love to see more content like that, more people sort of showing how their body relates to fashion and how fashion ultimately makes them feel.
I know this is a very general question, but what needs to be done in fashion towards inclusion? There's been a long path. We've been done a lot of progress, but what else needs to be done, and what else should we be seeing in the next couple of years?
Now what we want to see is sustained engagement, I think, with different axes of diversity, and we want to see intersectional inclusion. So I'll just speak briefly on both. Sustained engagement means that brands are consistently casting diverse models across a different number of axes. So they're consistently casting models who are older, models who may be, say, above a size 2, a 6, a 10, right, in their images, advertisements, and runway shows. We also want to see sustained engagement with models of color, right, and those who have been marginalized or underrepresented, including trans models and so on. So we want to see sustained engagement. And this is something that most of us can actually keep an eye out for, and that is pretty measurable. So we can look, for example, at the number of models of color over runway shows each season, and we can see whether or not brands are actually, keeping up with this, if we can see that they are consistently engaging with diversity along this axis. So that's where sustained engagement is really important, and that's something to keep an eye on. Outside of that, we want to see intersectional kinds of representation. So this is where we see models who embody 2 or more types of difference at once. So this may be a model of color who is also trans, or a model of color who also has a disability. This is important because in the real world, people embody these multiple differences, right? There are not so many of us who embody just a single kind of being. Many of us actually occupy 2 or more of these axes of difference. And so it's really important to see that kind of representation in mainstream fashion and elsewhere. Now, the fashion industry sometimes does a really good job of this, and other times very, very poor. So this is something we can keep an eye on, is our fashion brands really engaging with this kind of intersectional representation? The last thing that I think is worth noting is disability specific, and that's, are fashion manufacturers actually making clothing for people with a disability? Are they adapting their garments for disability, or are they simply including people with a disability in, say, images or advertisements? This is 2 different things, because one speaks to a very real investment in the disability community that would be adapting their clothing and actually manufacturing for disability. The other is more a sort of gesture or what we would call tokenism, where we're simply including people for the sake of including them, or in order to say appease a body of consumers who then ultimately can't shop from the clothing on show anyways. So it's really important with respect to disability that we see fashion manufacturers actually creating and investing in adaptable kinds of fashion.
And this needs to be all year long, right? Because there are sometimes like collections, this disability awareness collection, and then that's it. And then Earth Day is coming. Let's be sustainable, but just for 1 month. And then Pride Month in June. Let's be diverse. Let's celebrate the LGBTQ plus community, but just in June. And then in July 1st, they forget the LGBTQ plus community exists. So we want diversity, equity, and inclusion all year long. And I know that this is like a lot of work in the fashion companies, that they are doing their best, because I think that many fashion designers and many people in these companies genuinely want to do it, but they have been doing things differently for so long that it's hard to make this transition. So that's why it's taking so long, right, Jordan?
Yeah, it's taken a long time to get here, and a part of that is, and this is, for people who are less familiar with the fashion industry, this is an industry that is characterized by quite high risk, high cost of production, and a lot of ambiguity around consumer desire. So this means that making changes can actually be quite sort of risky for people in the industry, and this is an industry that tends to avoid that kind of risk. What David and I show in our research is that, in fact, making these kinds of decisions are good for your bottom line. On top of being, I think, the sort of right thing to do in terms of fashion moving forward, they are also quite lucrative for fashion brands. So brands that have made a really concerted effort toward greater diversity and inclusion are seeing material returns. So a great example of this that I like to point to is the difference between sort of Aerie, which is a lingerie offshoot of American Eagle in North America, versus the sort of bankruptcy of Victoria's Secret. So Aerie cast models with a disability in their images and advertisement campaigns more than, I think it's 4 years ago now. They started to do this. They saw a huge boon in terms of sales. And even over the course of the pandemic, they saw an increase in their sales, which is fascinating. Whereas Victoria's Secret, in parallel, right, at about this time, were reporting loss over loss over loss, and then inevitably announced bankruptcy. So these are very different outcomes, right? For a brand who was sort of staunch advocate of a very narrow beauty ideal versus a brand that was willing to be more diverse and inclusive in terms of how they defined beauty for consumers of fashion. And so this is something that, pays. It makes good economic sense to include, diverse people in your representations, your store images, your runway shows, and so on. So for this industry that, as you allude to quite rightly, is risk averse, and it can be very expensive to do the kinds of productions that they're investing in. And so naturally there's a certain amount of hesitation in terms of deviating from anything that's tried and true. But as I said, there's really good reason now. We have good data now to suggest that there are very few losses to experience by pushing in this direction.
Yes, fashion has always represented who we are throughout history, and little by little is evolving because our mindset is evolving and because we want fashion to evolve. Jordan, it's been great having you. Thank you so much for your knowledge, for sharing all of this with us. This has been super meaningful. Is there anything else that you would like to add about your work? Anything that I didn't ask? Anything that like you're so proud of that you want to share with us?
I think that you captured it really well. So I just, I want to say thank you so much for being here. I hope that we get to, or sorry for having me here. I hope that we get to talk again. This is something that I will keep an eye on. It's something that I'm still very much engaged with, and that there is some ongoing work that David and I are still doing for disability and representation. If you ever want to talk again about social media, inequality, that's sort of my thing. I will continue to sort of develop my research in that vein. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me today. I hope that the audience finds this conversation interesting.
Absolutely. Where can people find you and know more about your work and about you?
So you can find me on Twitter. It's Jordan_Foster. You can also find me on Instagram, where I do digital ethnography as a social media influencer. And that is Jordan, Jordyn Foster, Foster.
Awesome. I'm going to leave those links in the episode description. Thank you so much for your time, Jordan. And thanks everyone for listening. Remember that you can listen to this podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, TuneIn, Amazon Music, Deezer Music. Check out our Facebook page, Polemic Nation, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Polemic Nation. Thank you so much for your time. And until next time.